بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful.
كلا إن الإنسان ليطغى
No, but indeed man transgresses,
أن رآه استغنى
because he sees himself self-sufficient.
إن إلى ربك الرجعى
Indeed, to your Lord is the return.
أرأيت الذي ينهى
Have you seen the one who forbids,
عبدا إذا صلى
a servant when he prays?
أرأيت إن كان على الهدى
Have you seen if he is upon guidance,
أو أمر بالتقوى
or enjoins righteousness?
أرأيت إن كذب وتولى
Have you seen if he denies and turns away?
ألم يعلم بأن الله يرى
Does he not know that Allah sees?
كلا لئن لم ينته لنسفعا بالناصية
No. If he does not desist, we will surely drag him by the forelock.
ناصية كاذبة خاطئة
A lying, sinning forelock.
فليدع ناديه
Then let him call his associates.
سندع الزبانية
We will call the angels of hell.
كلا لا تطعه واسجد واقترب
No, do not obey him, but prostrate and draw near to Allah.
It's also, we are live on our website, rr365.co.uk/live, and on our Facebook. 8th of April, 17th of Ramadan. Iftar today is at 8:15 in Glasgow. I'm your host, Zubair Akram, with Program Reflections, and my guest, Sheikh Ridwan Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Surah Alaq, inshallah, as we've been doing for the last few days. Yesterday we started the second part of this Urdu mein kehte hain dusra rukh, the second portion of the subject. The first one was the ayah number 1 to 5, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, and then we started with the next bit, which is Innal insana la yatgha. And I think we connected this with what we've been discussing, the theme of apostasy or takfir, people leaving the religion, and how some people who don't take heed of this part of the scripture, that they feel they're self-sufficient, maybe in knowledge, and they become haughty, and then they become without knowledge. They think they possess knowledge, and they also fall in the same category of these ayahs. Is this, Sheikh, a connection which is allowed in tafsir to make?
Did I make that connection? I don't know.
Well,
in that sense, that's
I
an interesting one you made. So I'm thinking, are you repeating what I've said in the previous session?
No,
Or is this...
I'm asking.
That's what I thought. I didn't make that jump. Yeah, that's an interesting jump. So basically what you're saying is that إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَن رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى, that indeed, nay, indeed, like English is so difficult to translate. Kalla, no way.
Hargiz nahi.
In colloquial English, no way, Jose. So it's like, however you can emphasize a rebuttal, that's what it is. Innal insana la yatgha is like, indeed, human being is considers himself to be self-sufficient. So the first thing was, I said that this idea of considering, imagining themselves. Ra'a, ar-ra'a is that they imagine themselves, think themselves, postulate that they are, not that they know. Know is like you have definite knowledge. So this is kind of conjectural, airy fairy kind of imaginations that a person has, that what they're sitting back and they're having, imagining a situation where they are mustaghni, they are totally independent of everything. They don't need, I mean, if you're going to say that, you might as well say, I don't need time, space. I don't need a place to live. I don't need the natural process of the body to stay alive, the blood circulation, and so on and so forth, the immune system. You're not mustaghni in that sense. But, the more that we get money, and ghina, is basically this idea of wealth. Prophet said that al-ghina is not from the amassing of a lot of goods, but rather ghina, which is true, enrichment, is ghina nafs, which is the enrichment of the soul. The more you enrich your soul. So what happens here is people think the more they can enrich things other than the soul, which is the body, so also the intellect in terms of arrogance, not thinking correctly. That is what's mentioned straight away after the first 5 verses. And so your thing was, you were saying that can kufr, I don't think takfir, but kufr, can it leaving in apostasy? You mean ridda? So not takfir. Takfir is the act of stating somebody else is not a Muslim. Ridda is to leave a state of faith.
No,
It can, and to be honest, just to finish that, it is definitely the case that the majority of people I've met, who've spoken to, in the situation where they said, I don't want to be part of this faith, is all based upon this intellectual arrogance. It's kind of this sense of, well, other people have something far more superior. And it's based upon ra'a dhalika. He imagines that, or presupposes that, or thinks that. Not that they know it, because I spoke to somebody, it was about 4 years ago, and they were somebody I had not met for it was about 15 years. And he said, well, Muslim world's all full of people killing people, and Islam's a violent religion. And what is the history of humanity except for religious people killing people? And then I said, okay, so there is wars taking place on the earth. There's, there's about 1 million people died almost directly as a result of Western intervention in the Middle East. Okay, let's start there. And he kind of was mumbling a bit. And then I said, okay, leave aside that, which is absolutely true. Leave aside American intervention in Vietnam and the fact they've been involved in over 50 wars outside their own territory since the Second World War. Leave aside all of that. I said, in human history, what's the situation with, deaths? I think I mentioned this yesterday. The whole idea of how many people were killed in religious wars, how many wars in history have been religious wars, is negligible. And all of a sudden, he realized that he couldn't get away with just saying that statement to me. And he started saying, oh, well, I don't feel spiritual energy. And he was making things up at that point. He realized the rug was taken right from under his carpet. He was exactly that. كَلَّا إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى. When people leave Islam, and they have this, they inexorably have this sense of intellectual superiority, moral superiority, that they're cleverer than the Muslims. And this goes back to this whole thing right at the beginning. I remember I did mention about human civilization and the way that people market it was GDP, gross domestic product. And I think we had a bit of a ding dong back and forth agreement on this. But what is, there's like research done. Ghina, Ghina is like wealth. So we think, okay, GDP per capita GDP. Okay, that the Anglosphere, which has some of the highest GDP in the world, it also has the highest rates of depression and anxiety in the world as well. And there is, and in fact, there's studies done. This is a positive correlation between GDP and rates of ingrained depression and anxiety. Yeah, and so what they say is that this idea of ghina, which is wealth, idea of wealth and being rich and feeling that you're rich and sufficient, is not related to worldly possessions. So this is so important because it comes up in the Quran so many times about people enumerating their wealth until they get to their graves. This whole idea of يكنزون الذهب بالفضة ولا ينفقون في سبيل الله. Collecting gold and silver, not spreading in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a leitmotif, a theme in the Quran, that this leads to the state where you think you will live forever, you have wealth that will allow you to last forever and be self-sufficient and not need anything. You can just drip feed this into your life. The reality is that the nafs, which is who you are, your sense of yourself, is where if you think of who you are, you're not your bank balance, it's separate to you. It's one component added to your family, friends, society, where you're living, your health. Wealth is one add-on. It's like a, what do you call it in computer program? It's like a what's it called? Plug-in. It's a plug-in to make who you are. It's all these plugins. And we were doing some changes on our website, and we wanted to do something, and then the developer had to come back after doing it work on it for about 2 months. He said, we can't do it because if we put this plugin in, all the other plugins don't work. And so you have to have plugin, all this, you and me, we know all this kind of stuff. So plugins in a website, they're there to add functions, but you have to balance them. And so wealth is one of these plugins you have to balance with everything else. And so in the West, what we find is, and this in fact in the Muslim world as well, in the Arab Muslim world, the rates of depression and anxiety increased after having been very low before the Arab Spring. They just shot up after the Arab Spring. So this idea of contentment, this idea that we failed in an attempt to escape. For example, imagine you're in prison and you want to escape and you've been oppressed and all the rest of it. You're a political prisoner, imagine, and you're just about to get it, and then all of a sudden you're thwarted in your attempt. That deflation you get, this sense of failing, is going to affect your personal ghina, your kind of nafs, your sense of value. And so that's really important.
So what I'm getting is that this whole journey of mankind, or the whole journey of human being, is to attain calmness, stillness. And if anything that interferes in this stillness is something which is not wanted, and this thing, which is the feeling of self-sufficiency, is also an intervention which actually ultimately kills your stillness. Because interdependence is what's required, not the feeling of self-sufficient.
Yeah, not the feeling of independence. Yes, because remember, independence is good. Like a child.
Interdependence.
Interdependence is what we need, not independence.
Exactly.
Like as a nafs.
Yeah.
Because what we find is, like a child, when I've noticed my son, the moment he turns 7, I can see that he's wanting to impose his independence. So if I say, okay, let's wear this for school, and he'll say, usually he would just capitulate, but now even if he's going to wear it, he wants to do it in his own terms. So you have to impress upon other people that I can make my own decisions, and it'll get to the point where I've got a friend whose son is like, obviously wants to make his own way in life, but he's basically calling his bluff and saying, okay, if you want to do it, you make your own life. Like you earn your own living, your own house, if you can support a family, which is calling the bluff, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting. That independence is the feeling of us and the falling of us. And the understanding of that we're interdependent, as you said, is the fact that we go back to this idea of human beings are based on uns. The insan is based upon this meaning of uns, which is, it's a double-edged sword. You thrive on human interaction, but you also use that human interaction to lose your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you get lost in the world, you get lost in connections and people and things like hubb al-jah, like the desire to be known and to be in the public public arena. It becomes a disease, which is one of the worst diseases of the heart. And so everything that makes you up, makes up who you are, is a double-edged sword.
Havas chup chup ke bana leti
I knew there's poetry coming. I knew to see it from your face.
Havas chup chup ke bana leti hai seene mein tasveerein. Iqbal ye kehta na ke, we do this like as if nothing is going to happen, but the havas of being known, silently creeps in.
The pull, that kind of, yes, it's the pull, havas. Yes, lovely word.
हवस छुप छुप के बना लेती है सीने में तस्वीरें.
Yeah, amazing.
छुप
It
छुप के
creeps in and just makes these images of immortality.
Yep, yep.
Wow.
This is
That
hawas.
guy was on Iqbal. You know, Iqbal was he's underrated. You know that?
Not in this part of the world.
Nobody in Pakistan really cares about him. You know that? That's so underrated. Actually, I was
Hawas.
speaking to somebody yesterday, and they were saying, we missed the fact that when our fathers used to meet together, they would just throw a Iqbal, just while they're putting their shoes on at the mosque, like just throw out a line of Iqbal just to put their shoes on.
Yeah.
And here we are, is the third generation, a bunch of delinquents, illiterates, unable
Well,
to string a sentence together. Or Wordsworth, he was saying we don't even use Wordsworth or Keats or the great English poets, or
subhanallah.
Rabbie Burns, Scottish poet. Imagine going to the mosque and getting people
Get it.
quoting you Robert Burns.
Rubber runs. Well, it needs to be quoted. I think we need to learn and we need to disseminate. I think poetry is amazing in the sense that it encapsulates so much in just one sentence.
Yeah, because shi'r in Arabic is from shu'ur, which is a feeling. It's like this deep feeling that you cannot articulate, but it's like pours out.
Yeah.
And sha'air is like the sha'air of Islam, this term, are the things that are indications of Islam, like the minaret, the dome, the Kaaba, for example. These are the sha'air of Allah, because they manifest themselves. They kind of pour out. And your hair, if Allah still allowed you to be blessed with hair, iksha'arra, like they kind of stand on end.
Yeah.
When you hear something that affects you, something good or bad, it affects you. They say the hairs stood up in the back of my neck.
Yeah.
So that is because something hits you that you cannot make sense of. Your body can't make sense of. So all of a sudden, it does something that's outside the norm of how the body works.
True.
And so with shi'r, it's like the Prophet said, indeed, from amongst shi'r is magic. This kind of this wand of incantations that come from the ability for human beings to take what Allah has taught them in terms of words, in terms of names, in terms of indications, use the implications of words and the association of words and the metaphors and the literary devices that we have at our disposal, and create something that you cannot even do in a movie. You can't even create the sense of power that language has in a movie. And this is why the Quran comes and says it's not shi'r. وَمَا هُوَ بِشَاعِرٍ. The Quran says the Prophet was never a sha'ir. It's one of the attacks on him.
Yeah, but yet it's powerful.
Yes, it's extremely powerful.
It is powerful. So, Sheikh, yesterday we finished off with this ayah that ultimately, just beware. You have to get back to someone. Inna ila rabbika ruj'a. Surely to your Lord is your return. So after doing
so
all
I
of that,
did that. I think tongue in cheek at the end of the yesterday's. I think I did mention McConnor MMA mix. You don't know. I don't know if you ever watched mixed martial arts or.
No, I haven't.
You know
I haven't
who
had privilege.
McConnor is? You know who McConnor is? The Irish mixed martial artist. You Khabib.
Yes.
From Dagestan. So yeah, obviously you know him. He's famous. But anyway, before these fights, and even boxing fights, they have this. They basically, put psychological pressure on each other, and they say, "You can, when you're in the ring, I'm going to make you cry," or, "I'm going to break this, and I'm going to do this," and before, and they're very poetic sometimes. They'll say that, the next time you see a light is going to be in the hospital or something. And then this happened with Khabib and McConnor, and Khabib just said nothing, and then he basically said, when we get into the ring, in his own Dagestani English broken accent, when you get in the ring, I'm going to smash your boy. and then he's basically saying, at some point you're going to have to stand in front of me. So you can do all the posturing you like, you can do all the mockery you like, the showmanship you like.
A few people know that he's Dagestani. He's known as Russian, right? But yeah,
Really?
Dagestan. Yeah.
I thought people would know
Not
he's
many people would know
Dagestani,
he's
but didn't know
Dagestani.
that Dagestan is part of Russia. because
But
I
the
had so many.
emphasis is Dagestani. I mean, you kept saying Dagestani. I mean, it is very important to relate him back to where he belongs, which is
The reason
Dagestan.
why you have to is because if you ever met Dagestani, I had
Yeah.
a couple of really good friends in when I was studying in Syria, specifically from Dagestan.
Mm,
Real, I mean, mashallah, like and Chechens, really good friends, and there's no messing about with them, and their akhlaq is top notch. It's like there's no physical messing about with them, and their akhlaq is
yeah.
top notch. Like it's a combination. Subhanallah, this is Islam gave them. This is why they
Mm,
hold on to it so greatly. Yeah, so this is the whole thing. Inna ila rabbika ruj'a, that indeed to your Lord is going to be the ruj'a. This kind of, it's almost as if the train is left and it's circular. It's going to go all the way around, and there's this track only comes back. You know, like
mm,
imagine Glasgow Underground.
mm,
If you get on at Buchanan Street, okay,
mm.
underground, you're going to come back to Buchanan Street Underground.
Yeah.
So imagine you're in Buchanan Street and there's somebody you swore at, and they're on the platform, and you're in the train, and you leave, and you think you've missed.
Mm,
No consequences. You get to what's St Enoch's next, and then it's Bridge Street and Shields Road and Kinning Park. You keep going around Ibrox. I'm going to name all of them here. Partick, and you get to Kelvin Hall, and then you get to St George's Cross, and you get to Kilcaddens. You know that person's still on the platform. You couldn't get out in any of these. And guess what? When that door opens, that knuckle is going to smash your face.
You're going to get back to where
This
you
is my
started.
misspent youth. I'm thinking about here, but you understand the point, don't you? You understand
Yep,
the point
yep,
that
yep.
this life is a circle. God created it, and it's that you go. It's like sending out somebody. You're gonna have to come back, and when you come back, there's some kind of examination here. So you can postulate, boast, do anything you want. You can, like the wars that happened in the Middle East on the back of the Western intervention. There is like this. Immanuel Kant has this amazing idea that it's called the categorical imperative. It's actually, for him, proves that God exists, which is he sees people creating so much oppression, injustice, killing, and the most vile things they do on earth. But despite that, everybody believes in justice. Everyone believes that justice should be done. Why should we believe that? There's nobody on the earth that I know of or have heard of does not believe that there will be some kind of ultimate justice. We hold on to that as communities, societies, civilizations. And he said, it doesn't make any sense unless you know that justice ultimately will be done. When the end comes, it has to be done. And he says, look on earth, you see people killing and maiming and being unjust and dying and not having to answer for anything they've done. And we still see that, and we still believe in justice. Otherwise, what would we do? We would join their club and become oppressive and just fight oppression with oppression. We don't. And he said, well, the reason we do that is because we know that there's somewhere else where justice will be done. Do you understand? He said, we know deep down as human beings, as insan, we would say as insan, that this ability to think, so Ines tells us that there's somewhere where this will be administered justice. And he says that can only be done after you die, and that can only be done by a judge, which is God. So he doesn't set out to prove that God exists. He says the way we behave shows that God exists. And so this is this idea that inna ila rabbika ruj'a. This in different ways. This verse proves that God exists. That's the Kantian proof for God's existence indirectly. So I think the previous session, I did provide another proof for God's existence. I mean, I didn't think anyone's thought of it, but there was another thing. So the more you tadabbur on the Quran, the more that you understand its layered meaning, its impact, and its power.
When you say it's a proof of God, so someone who has doubts, is this enough of a proof?
No, it's one of these things that some people will say, well, we see injustice being done on earth, and we see people who are unjust getting away with it. How does that make any sense? Well, we just use the Kantian proof that he provided, which is that everybody believes in justice. The reason they believe in it is because they know ultimately it will be done. If it's not done here, it must be done somewhere else. after death.
But
So
that's a
this
proof of life hereafter.
life hereafter, but you have to have a judge. Like if you come to the end, if you say, okay, you have another life after this, and then in that life you could have another situation of justice, injustice, and then imagine you die in that life, then you have another life of injustice. So
It's
why do we still believe in?
it's a delayed justice. It's a
Yeah,
delayed
it's
judgment.
delayed, but as human beings, as Muslims, we believe that as well. Dua, that it's يدخر إلى يوم القيامة أحيانا. Very famous scholars say that sometimes in the part of the hadith of Prophet ﷺ, that dua is either accepted here, or you're given something better, or that it will be delayed for you on the day of judgment. In the hereafter. And so we understand there's an idea of delay. There's an idea of you're not mustaghni, you're not completely disattached to the world. Not everything happens in the way that you want it. There's an order to how things work. When we learn the alphabet, and then if you're learning English, it's the worst language to learn because what you read is not what is pronounced. And so that struggle, you have to go through it to get to the next level, that's gradation, tadarruj we talked about. And it's the same thing with
I was
justice.
going to take a break, but I'm not going to because this concept of istighna is also linked very deeply with tadarruj.
Yeah, I just made the connection. I don't know how, but there was a connection there.
No, it came to me, and I was just about to say it, and you said it before me.
Khalas, this is even though we're 4 hours by air flight distance.
Subhanallah. Seriously, as soon as you said istighna,
I should be your
and
student.
astaghfirullah. No, delayed justice, delayed acceptance of du'as. It's not delayed. It's tadarruj, isn't it?
Yes, and do you know there's come to think of it, if you mention that, I'll mention something even better, which is that there's a study
There you go.
about
There you go. Okay,
Yeah,
go for it.
there's a study about knowing the success parameters of a child while they're in their infancy. There's ways of finding out if your child will be successful, which is if they have this idea of delayed gratification, it's an indication that they will be very successful in later life. So if you give them 2 marshmallows, halal, with halal gelatin, as you need to have it, keep it halal here. And you tell the child, if you have this now, you can have it now. If you have it later, you'll get 2. So the child, if they want it now, bad sign. You need to work on that child. They need to work on the fact that they need to think to the end result. And so if you have it later, 2 hours later, even though you're hungry, you get 2. And so the intelligent child will think, and they're not thinking, they don't know what delayed gratification is, but that's what it is, tadarruj. That in some way they're understanding that to develop and grow, sometimes you have to take short-term damage to gain long-term. And so this is a sign of the child being able to intellectualize, to articulate, and to think about things deeply.
Subhanallah. Time coming up for break, and in this half an hour that we've had, people who've listened to it, you can listen to it again on SoundCloud and on our YouTube as well. Some amazing concepts, and one of the areas we've introduced is Dagestan. And Sheikh, there is this. I read a book, not into the full. It's a biography of Rasul Hamza Tof. I don't know if you've come across. Rasul Hamza Tof. He's a Dagestani, and I don't know if it is in English. I've read it in Urdu. It's translated from Dagestani to Urdu, and it's full of these lessons. Delayed gratification, uns. It's actually, I think, if there is one thing that comes out in the entire, quite a thick autobiography, is uns. How interdependent people are, communities are, and what happens to a community when they realize and recognize they are interdependent. So Rasul Hamza Tof is a name to remember. A Dagestani Iqbal, can I say. Time for a short ad break, and inshallah we'll be right back.
Radio Ramadan 365, sound for the soul.
ये बच्चे भी स्कूल जा सकते हैं। गजाली एजुकेशन ट्रस्ट अपने 700 से
Radio Ramadan 365 Sound for the Soul.
Big Day Events, Scotland's biggest Asian caterers and event planners, specialists in full wedding packages with access to numerous
Radio Ramadan 365. Radio Ramadan 365 Sound for the Soul.
जो सरबसर है कलाम रबी, वो मेरे आका की जिंदगी है, ये सब तुम्हारा करम है.
Radio Ramadan Reflections with Sheikh Razan Muhammad. We just before the break, we finished off, I would say, ayah number 6, 7, and 8 of Surah Alaq. I think everyone can hear me. Yes. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. I can't hear you. Faisal, we have to fix this. Sorry.
No, I'm on.
Oh, okay, you're on. Okay, I think you're
Yes,
on
yes.
mute. So, the next few ayahs, which are very interesting, and I have a question in that ayah. The next few ayahs. हरगिज नहीं इंसान सरकशी करता है इस बिना पर कि वो अपने आप को बेनियाज देखता है, हालांकि पलटना यकीनन तेरे रब ही की तरफ है. तुमने देखा उस शख्स को जो एक बंदे को मना करता है. So there are two characters here. तुमने देखा उस शख्स को जो एक बंदे को मना करता है जबकि वो नमाज पढ़ता हो. So these two characters, who are these two characters?
Yeah, so أرأيت الذي ينهى. So this is a question. This is called a rhetorical question, which means it's a question. Do you see? And what's understood is you have seen. Do you not? If I say do you not understand? Like you should understand. It's clear. أرأيت الذي ينهى. Have you seen the person that forbids? So you can forbid numerous things, but this is revealed in the context. So there's also asbab al-nuzul. Asbab al-nuzul are the reasons why things were revealed initially. And the big thing about this is, if something's revealed about something initially, it means that this is the reason, or this is the backdrop to why it was revealed. But then it has further utility in human history. In other words, whatever happens here in terms of the verse and the wording itself, it will be immediately and directly relevant to the Prophet ﷺ's life. And then as a result of that, we will also, because he's the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with a universal message, be able to universalize that to other people. So that this instance actually is very early on in the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, in which Abu Jahl comes and he does something very interesting, which is that he says that, if Muhammad ﷺ even dares to come in the sacred precinct of the Haram, which is where the Kaaba is, and prostrates, he said basically that I will stamp, from what I remember, he said I will stamp on his neck. In other words, he will forbid him, and the way he would do that was to physically accost him and to attack him. And this is his claim to fame, that he will do this, because the Prophet ﷺ was obviously dismantling the narrative of the Quraysh, this undermining the social fabric of their society, and first and foremost undermining the religious standards that they were holding themselves to. And so the Prophet ﷺ is the one mentioned who is being forbidden, is being prevented. So yanha is to prevent. Have you seen the one that prevents? Prevents what? Prevents. What is it? The person is being prevented from what? Injustice? Is being prevented from illicit acts? Is he being prevented? He's being prevented from an act of piety. Abdan idha salla. He is preventing a servant, meaning a servant of Allah, for the simple reason of praying, for the simple reason of articulating his worship of Allah in a public context. So in this, it's two people, the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Jahl. And from that perspective, it's a simple story. One person wanted to pray, another person didn't want to pray. He said, if he prays, I'll stamp on his neck. And Allah is just saying, look at the situation. Look at this amazing situation of one person just wanting to pray in public, another person just wanting to stop him. And so it has some insight into the seerah. But I think it has, in that sense, it has limited meaning if we just take it to be somebody wants to pray, somebody wants to stop him. But the purpose of it is أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يَنْهَى عَبْدًا إِذَا صَلَّى. His general thrust is what? It resonates throughout human history. Because what's being indicated as a generic pattern is, do you not see there's people that stop people from just being good people? Like this came up in the recent the SMP was it the first minister the leadership contest. When one of the candidates was right away off the bat questioned about her religious identity, questioned in a sense which should be actually against every equality rights that I know of. There's a I think 2010 Equalities Act that if she wanted, she could have taken the journalist she wanted that interviewed her to court, because it goes against the Equalities Act 2010 for the simple thing of ascribing yourself to a religious tradition and then being able to speak about it openly. And so people being hounded in public office or in a public situation for having religious views is exactly the same as what we're, this sort of alaq is talking about.
And this is exactly how we should approach Quran, that it is not just a book which has a context in that 1400 years ago, but it has a context for us, and we map and we correlate it to our situation.
Really? No, of course.
The
reason I read the Quran, and sometimes I'm just like, I need to sit down, is like it's just so real and raw sometimes. Like the Quran here is very, very clearly stating something which is a specific, which has a universal archetype, which is that people in power and authority that drive the agenda want to dictate the agenda to the point of taking people's ability to act in a public context. Because essentially the problem is praying in public. They wouldn't have a problem. Abu Jahl wouldn't have a problem if the Prophet was praying in Dar al-Arqam, for example. He didn't want him to leave Dar al-Arqam. He didn't want companions to go out and tell other people about it. He wouldn't care because he knew the economic system was going to be under threat. The system of slavery was going to be under threat. The system of having complete slave control of your women is going to be under threat. The ability of the privilege of the Qurayshi tribe is going to be under threat. Everything is under threat the moment that you make a universal statement publicly.
So just these two ayahs out of this Surah Alaq can easily make this surah fit our title. We said Islamic civilization. It's a civilizational surah.
Yeah, I was going to come to that because you mentioned that. One of the things of building a real civilization is a civilization where the divine who created us is part of the conversation, is allowed to be part of the conversation. A society which bolts in the minds of people the ability not to discuss or talk or engage with the religious aspect and spiritual aspect of themselves in public life is a society that's doomed to complete annihilation. I've said that. I think I said this when we were doing Surah Al-Rum, which a couple of years ago. And I think I did it when Surah Al-Kahf. It's a thing that I very vehemently disagree with, that you cannot articulate anything in public life which is faintly religious. And the worst one for me is, in Britain you have the Radio 4 Thought for the Day.
Thought for the Day, yeah.
Religious And sometimes you listen to it and you think, for goodness sake,
You're
like you
skirting.
walk
You're
down,
skirting around. You're skirting around.
you're talking about your cat and cat food, and then right at the end you say God, or you don't, and you say something like, "So I pray that the divine will ease you in your suffering, or ease you in your difficult day today as you get your coffee."
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
and this is like Archbishop, and this is even like Muslim contributors, and it's so cuddly and so lovely. And the reality is, if you take religious, moral, ethical teachings out of the public sphere, you are emaciating public discourse. Emaciating meaning you're making it like a skeleton.
Yeah.
Because the whole tradition, Western tradition, is based upon ethical, philosophical thought. You know, you watch. There was a movie. What was it called? 300. So, so this is a movie about the ongoing Sassanid and Byzantine wars between the Romans and the Greeks. Sorry, the Greeks and the Byzant and the Persians. And there's one of the battles. There was only 300 of the Greeks left, and they fought. And right at the end, it was all kind of pseudo historical. But at the end, they had this whole speech about the benefits of democracy, and they just put it in. But essentially, this is all hot air. Everything that they have is hot air. If they demote religious values and they just make it secular, and these verses are very, very powerful, because it's not just praying, but there's an impact to prayer. There's a the correlation to praying to God and knowing that there's some kind of moral truth. Absolute, there's some kind of moral absolute truth that everybody agrees upon. Not just Muslims, but every single person. There are certain givens. We don't ascribe to a relativist agenda. And so this could be just two people. One is the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and one is Abu Jahl. But it is something that far, in its context, far outstrips the context of, Arabia at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because it has so much impact. And so when Allah allows this to happen, Abu Jahl is saying this. Allah is almost knowing through qada and qadar that he's going to say this. And God knows that he will amplify this for everybody to recite to the end of time. That have you not seen the person when they bar another from praying? And so it did happen. But then that thing that happened is now amplified.
So these two, can we say it is also, as you've been kind of calling this term, tyranny of thought and it's tyranny of action, both. Will this ayah be tyranny of thought and action both, or is it just action? Because it's the one who stops the act of worship.
It's both. I mean, it's tyranny of thought and action. It's a thought police, but it's the police as well. It's like the physical police. It's the thought police. It's like it's the officers coming to your home telling you what to do, and it's also the narrative on national radio and television and the movies telling you what to think. It's both. There's a tyranny. And one of the things that the Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, Abu Hanifa, they all agree upon, Dar al-Islam is anywhere that you can establish Islam in public without any restrictions. Like, the public display of Islam, which is the prayers, the acts of worship. We're talking about Sharia in terms of its penal law, in terms of its statutory law. We're talking about the sha'air, the prayer, the call to prayer, the jum'ah, the dua, and so on and so forth. The moment that happens, it becomes essentially Dar al-Amn, Dar al-Islam, according to a lot of scholars. And so that's what you're told to try and establish. In other words, this is a pushback from, in the sense, Muslims always used to push towards the fact that they should never be a bar on people being able to pray. And if you think of the expansion of Muslim civilization, when it did expand, it was to places to allow that place to be a land where people who wanted to pray could pray. It wasn't expansion for the sake of the crops, the wealth, the power. It was to allow the land to be able to be somewhere where you could establish your religious faith. And this is why one of our teachers, Sheikh Wahabi Zuhaili, rahimahullah, passed away a couple of years ago now. He said that Western international law should, if applied properly, allow the whole of the world to be essentially Dar al-Islam, because you have you should have by your right as a human being, the right to freedom of religion as an absolute. And he says that's the reason why the Ottomans spread, that's why the Khulafa Rashidun, they spread the message of Islam, because they knew there's people in the outskirts that needed to hear it. If they heard it, they became Muslim, they should be able to practice that freely in public. And if they weren't allowed to, then they expanded. Simple as that. And if they were allowed to practice freely, they would have not have expanded. Like the famous case of Habasha. The Prophet ﷺ said, leave the people of Habasha, it's really by Imam Tirmidhi and others, leave the people of Habasha as long as they leave you, because they used to let Muslims practice their faith. And it's fascinating, Habasha wasn't one of the countries that was expanded, even though it's the first place, think of this, it's the first place the Muslims go to when they were expelled from Mecca to Mukarramah. It's Abyssinia. Abyssinia is essentially out of the realm of being conquered by Muslim armies, because the Prophet ﷺ said, leave Habasha as long as they leave you. And it was leave them because they leave you. They let you pray. Now, if people understood this, it would make a big difference to how you understand Islamic law, how you understand Khilafah, how you understand all the narrative that's going on amongst Muslims about establishing an Islamic state and things like that, which is absolutely right for them to do, but they don't understand the nuances of this. And this comes out of this thing. I mean, this, from one perspective, it's almost like, for me, it's almost like, think about it now, it's almost like a window for the Prophet ﷺ to say, this is the guidelines and the leitmotif and the headline of your expansion. That if a person allows you to pray, there's complete peace. And if a person does not allow you to pray, then you have to resist that. You have to in some way allow yourself the power and the authority to be able to pray in a specific land, in a specific place. And I said that before, the narrative.
And pray is not always literal, is metaphoric as well.
No, that's what I'm saying. So I'm saying that the idea of is a public display of religious affiliation. That you shouldn't feel that you cannot make a public display of affiliation. I think it was, it was mentioned the SMP leadership thing. The fact that your society and public discourse is so emaciated that you're not allowed to make public acknowledgements of your religious faith is extremely troubling, because if a white person can't do it, how can a person of color do it? How can a minority person is already, like Hamza Yusuf is a person in a minority situation, how is he going to even fathom that? Do you understand? So some people could, like Rees Moggs, famous conservative MP, him, really rich, went to Eton, the epitome of white privilege. Okay. And he asked about, his religious views. He's a Catholic, so he says, I just believe in the Holy Sacrament and all the rest of it. And he can say, because he's got all this privilege, it's very difficult for a person who's a minority to take that, have the same confidence to be able to get there and say the same thing. He won't survive. And so we have collectively allowed this encroachment of a secular narrative in the public sphere. Everybody in some way makes everything, and I don't like criticizing, but even Muslims, in terms of their narrative of how they interact with society, a lot of it is based upon we're victims of Islamophobia, anti-Muslim hate, we need rights, and that's our religious identity now. And there's a whole, I did a course, Islam in the West, a lot of it about the whole, I think it's a Trojan horse, which is the whole idea of Islamophobia, the Trojan horse, to water down religious identity in favor of political identity. So Muslims are a political entity and not a religious identity. That's what's going to happen. So Muslims are that's why I was, in a couple of sessions ago when I was quite angry about this whole episode. The reason for it is that everybody was singing off that hymn sheet. All the people all the people, I know them by name, saying, "Oh, we're working on making a change." Like 15 years ago, I've heard them say this. "Oh, we're going to, propose this, and councils will do this, and we're in the civil service, we'll do this." You've done nothing. And what you've done is ingrained this secular narrative within the public sphere by capitulating and being cowardly in this situation. Unfortunately, that is the truth. So when Allah says, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يَنْهَى عَبْدًا إِذَا صَلَّى, do you not see the person that forbids the servant when they try and pray, and it was make a public manifestation of religious affiliation?
Did you see him who forbids a servant of Allah when he prays?
Yeah.
أرأيت
You see
الذي
that?
ينهى عبدا إذا صلى.
You know, this event is so amazing. Can you not see, like, why would he stop him pray? Why would they stop the Prophet ﷺ praying if it's not that he makes it's a bigger statement than just praying? Because praying in public, in that sense, is in a sense
Show power.
it's a show of power. It's an amazing show of power, to be honest. Like, to be able to prostrate in a way that you're not prostrating to idols. You've basically decimated their economy. You've decimated their class structure, decimated their ethnic stratification, decimated everything that they hold dear by this simple act of disobedience.
Yeah.
And at that point, the Prophet ﷺ became a heretic in the eyes of the polytheists. And heretic, not in our modern sense of a religious heretic. Heresy in the past was actually completely tied in with politics, economics, power, because the moment you disobeyed the way that people operated, you're a heretic. You're an outcast.
And heresy kind of entailed exact same repercussions that Islam is criticized for.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you ostracized, and this is what happened to the Prophet ﷺ during, the 3 years when they were ostracized, and one of the values of Mecca al-Mukarramah, not to be spoken to, not to be given any trade or commerce, not to be married into, complete embargo on the Prophet ﷺ. It's very similar to what's happening in Palestine now. If you think of what's happening in Palestine, the sense of pushing people to the margins of their own lands. Think of it, Palestine. When I went to Palestine, I think it was about 2008. I went with a group. I was the only person stopped. 8 hours. I think it was about 8 hours, 6 hours. I was stopped and questioned at the entrance and allowed to go in. Now, when we went to Jerusalem, we went to the occupied territory, you could see the immediate difference when you just cross into the West Bank from the States, the occupied territories, Israel. You go and you move straight into occupied Palestine, you could see the drop in, infrastructure, everything was just allowed to be demolished and be, kind of not allowed to flourish.
Yeah.
The contrast was amazing, but it's this idea of pushing the narrative of the Palestinians out of public discourse. And now it's the same thing. If you look at the discourse of the Palestinian issue in the world, any Muslim country you go to, the leadership does not talk about the Palestinian issue, because it's not abdan idha salla. It's because there's Christians there, and they have a legitimate political grievance as well as a religious grievance. But let's just say within a secular paradigm, they have a political grievance, and they're just pushed out to the margins. And then you see every Ramadan, this same thing happens. You have this tension point where, just to impress upon Muslims the fact that there's a power dynamic in which Muslims have no power, this is the point at which this always explodes. It doesn't happen by chance. It always happens because they know if we provoke, Muslims will respond, and that's the cue for our actions over Ramadan.
So Sheikh, Abu Jahl really understood the meaning of public display of praying, right? Because the next two ayahs, أَرَأَيْتَ إِنْ كَانَ عَلَى الْهُدَى أَوْ أَمَرَ بِالتَّقْوَى. Did you consider what he is on the right way and enjoins piety? And enjoining piety.
Yeah, so it's basically a dialogue. It's a dialogue. So it's talking to us, Ara'ita. So it's talking to you. Okay, it's saying, do you? Because remember, there's the Prophet ﷺ, there's Abu Jahl. So these are the two protagonists in this instant. And there's 3 people actually. You said 2, there's 3.
3, okay.
Ara'ita anta.
Okay. So I'm the one who's watching.
Yeah, this is the whole thing. But there's this because in Arabic you have iltifat, which is this amazing rhetorical
Yeah.
strategy, which is you're not sure if it's you because it could be the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ is being told after it happened, let's review what happened, which is so deep because it's saying to the Prophet ﷺ, do you not see the situation where somebody forbade a servant when they were about to pray? Who's the servant? It's you, O Muhammad. In other words, after the event, he's being told, let's learn something about this. Do you understand? So he is having to retrace his experience of this situation. And the Prophet is being told, your experience, this has a bigger ramification than just you being assaulted at the Kaaba. Like Muhammad, you as a person, you have to take a universal meaning from this. So that's one aspect, which is like mind-boggling in its own way, if you think about it. The other aspect is you, Zubair, me, Rizwan. Look at this. Have you not seen? Have you never heard? Have you not reflected upon a person who forbids a servant from praying? And so in that sense, there's this sense that this has much more widespread impact than just what happened there. It's like, imagine some kind of injustice took place in the street and somebody recorded it on a mobile phone and they're now spreading it and they're pasting it and they're sharing it and so on and so forth. It's as if they're saying, have you not seen what happened? This injustice in the street. In America, for example, somebody's a car stopped and there's a person from the Black African American community. They're taken out and they're beaten. People take a video and they share it. And basically they're saying, have you not seen when this person was just driving to their work and then how they dealt with him? It's like the point being, take notice, take lessons, understand that this is something that should not take place. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes it even further. He says, okay, make a judgment now. And this is really powerful. أَرَأَيْتَ إِنْ كَانَ عَلَى الْهُدَى. Do you think this person was on guidance? Did he act rightly by stopping a servant just praying? Like, okay, you think about it and tell me. And so it's a question here. It's a rhetorical question. He's not on guidance, but it's asking you, okay, think through this. All he's doing is make a public display of worship of God. Do you think this person who forbade him was on guidance? Or he was ordering him with good taqwa? Like Abu Jahl, what was he doing? What was his role here? What's his justification?
Okay. It just never clicked.
What do you mean, okay?
This question is to Abu Jahl. It's challenging him. Do you think you are right? You are on the right way?
No, it's asking you to think, was he right?
Was he right? Okay.
In Kana al-Huda, did you think about it, O Muhammad? If you say the Prophet is now being taken out and being asked to revisit this instance that took place, or is us knowing Abu Jahl and the Prophet ﷺ were in this situation, and now we're being told, look, this is what happened. What do you think? Do you think Abu Jahl was guided in what he did? He had an ethical, moral reason for what he did. Do you think he had taqwa? He was aware. He claims to be worshipping God and the idol. Do you think this is correct? If the situation is no. But the thing is, it's the person's. It's you're involved in this as well because you have to make the judgment. And at the level of Prophet ﷺ, he's involved because he's being asked to revisit his steps in this whole situation. He went to pray. Abu Jahl said, if he comes, I'm going to stamp on his neck. That happens. And the Prophet ﷺ is being told now, have you not seen this person who thinks they're completely, free of any need and strong, and then he's going to have to come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Does he think, or have you seen the person when he forbids a servant when they pray? Do you now think, having seen that they were on guidance or some sort of God consciousness?
Sheikh, I think it's a very simple thing, isn't it? I'm just thinking, it's a game of power. It's simple that eloquence versus eloquence, leadership versus leadership. You have a leader, and then you have a prophet who's a leader. There is no comparison. And then you have, centuries-old tradition there of eloquence, of ijaz, of kalam in Arabia. And what you have is Quran. in comparison, isn't it? So it's not
Powerful,
even
yes.
it's not even poetry. It's more than poetry.
So is this simple idea of, and is this the power of an idea, not power of numerical power,
Mm,
like hundreds of thousands of people against one person's idea.
mm.
Like you have somebody who has like on YouTube 100,000 followers and blah blah blah. The numbers don't give it power. What gives it power is the idea. If the idea doesn't have any power, it has nothing. You
Yeah, but
understand?
it's idea taken up by strong leadership
Yes,
and
yes.
and manifested
Mm,
in every sense.
mm,
So it's idea followed by action, challenging it,
mm.
and there is this divine intervention.
Yeah, divine intervention is one of these things that if you show gratitude to Allah in what you're in your path, then Allah will increase that. It's a very simple. Well, in shakartum la azidannakum. Even in that situation of being in a situation where you're going to be humiliated, by a person in public, there's still an amazing opportunity for shukr, that you have this connection to be able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fact that you're in obedience to God
Mm.
doesn't matter. The fallout doesn't matter if you're able to do that. So to be in that situation, if you give shukr for that, there's like, it's so empowering, despite the fact that you're just one individual. It's like any act of civil disobedience is like that. You know you're on the right path. You know that your truth is on your side. History is on your side. And with the Prophet ﷺ, he's praying, he knows history is going to be on his side because the one that authors history is on his side. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is authoring it. He's commissioned him to be the Prophet, and he's ordered him to prostrate, and he's prostrating. And Allah is saying, look, this situation that's happened, it just shows the what I call the emaciated nature of a kufr society, which relegates religious feeling or religious impulse from public life.
We're coming to the end of this, and what you've said, sorry, I quote Iqbal. He says, Guman abad hasti mein yaqeen mard musalman ka. Gumane abad hasti mein yaqeen mard musalman ka. Beyaban ki shabe tarik mein kandil rahbani. So in the abode of doubts of existence is the
Yes.
certainty of the Muslim hero, that in the darkness of the desert night is a candle of monks.
Read it again. That's amazing.
गुमान आबाद हस्ती में यकीन मर्द
Yeah.
मुसलमान का बियाबां डेजर्ट बियाबां की शबे तारीख में किंदीले रहबानी. Guman, any
Translation.
idea,
Yeah,
translation.
give people a translation because people won't know the meaning of it.
In the abode of doubts of existence is a certainty of the Muslim, is a certainty of the Muslim or the idea. In the darkness of the desert night is the candle of the Rahbani, the person who receives Rahbaniyat.
Yeah, the slavehood and the divine
monk.
impulse.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's
yeah.
the light source in this darkness.
That's the light source.
MashaAllah.
That's the light source. So yeah,
Alhamdulillah.
what you've said has been said, but in a different way.
Alhamdulillah. I'm happy.
Alhamdulillah. What you said has been said by someone who is at par with Sheikh Rizwan.
No, astaghfirullah. Iqbal is like a deep ocean. Very humbled by his words always.
Subhanallah.
Yes.
Subhanallah. Yeah, so this surah, Alaq, is probably translated by Iqbal in his poem called Tulu Islam.
Yeah, this thing I was actually going to say that. You know that I was going to say that Jalaluddin Rumi, who Iqbal considers to be his murshid, and Iqbal share this amazing quality, two very rare qualities in Islamic history, of almost paraphrasing the Quranic text for people that could not access the text in prose and teaching stories. Very unique quality that they could turn the rhetorical force of the Quran and refashion it into a way that people could access it in the highest form of their own languages, Persian and Urdu. Will I grant him abundant peace, inshallah.
Well, Sheikh, Jazakallah khair for another deep reflection, I would say. This was my guest, Sheikh Rizwan Muhammad. Surah Alaq, the Surah of civilization, understanding the power of manifesting your faith in public and how it was challenged by the Abu Jahl, and Abu Jahl of today challenges the same. And we have a duty to be the true follower of Prophet Salatu Wasalam, inshallah. Sheikh, final few moments. We have a few moments left to summarize this.
Yeah, so today's section was interesting because we covered we kind of tied it into the first 5 verses. If you take the strand of tadarruj of the Quran being revealed over a gradual period of 23 years, everything happens through a process of tadarruj. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because everything happens in a state of gradation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is essentially going to ask human beings to reflect over their own lives. Because if God has taught people things gradually and they're being enriched through this, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to say, okay, take the richness from the Quran. But what people do is people consider themselves to be self-sufficient. And through that, they're in this state of tughyan. And so when you get into the state of tughyan and oppression, obviously it impacts other people. And the way that we tied into today's session was that it's the barring of religious iconography practice, ethical thinking within the public sphere. And so you can see that this strand of Islam civilization and knowledge comes very, very clearly out of this, because the way that we talk about civilization now, this is a godless civilization we're living in. The public forums, and I'm living in Turkey, even the whole idea of speaking about religion in public now is again now being maligned after 20 years of it being spoken about by the opposition, because there's something deep in the psyche of kufr that does not want to hear the divine being mentioned in public. And that is to the detriment of us as human beings. This is a sad thing. It's a detriment of ourselves as human beings, regardless of your religious tradition, just to detriment to have that voice missing in the public sphere when we're talking about wars, we're talking about economic and environmental degradation and disaster. To have that voice missing is essentially to the detriment of everybody.
Iftar in Glasgow is at 8:15. Inshallah, I will be back tomorrow with another episode of Reflections with Sheikh Rizwan. Until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.